The Royal Derwent Hospital continues to cast a pall over mental health services in Tasmania. Politicians across the political divide have acknowledged horrific things took place inside the walls of the notorious mental institution. Former patients want that to be formally acknowledged by way of a parliamentary apology. The absence of an apology has led to a claim in the Anti-Discrimination Commission.
That's it, what's left of it.
It's been a few years since Danny Lane has been to the Royal Derwent Hospital site in New Norfolk.
It's hard to believe there used to be 1,000 people living there once, if living was the right word to use.
The Royal Derwent Hospital and Willow Court closed 14 years ago. Built in 1827, it became Tasmania's mental institution. Successive inquiries and reports condemned much of the treatment of patients.
I can still remember the screams, the smell of stale urine, the smell of disinfectant, trying to cover the smell of urine. And I remember seeing women chained to the furniture. Like dogs. It wasn't a nice experience.
In 2000, it was closed under the watch of former Attorney General Judy Jackson.
It's just an inappropriate way for people to live. I'm sure you'd agree that you wouldn't like to live like this, and so why should anybody else?
There's little left of the Royal Derwent Hospital, and the old Willow Court complex is largely fenced off or undergoing restoration.
Erasing the buildings doesn't erase the memory. Just because the buildings are gone doesn't get rid of the nightmares and the night sweats.
Danny Lane spent a year in the Royal Derwent in the late 1960s. For years, she'd suffered sexual abuse. One of the perpetrators was a member of the Anglican Church. That perpetrator was later defrocked and jailed for assaults on others. At 14 years of age, Danny Lane was an alcoholic and self-harming.
And the police picked me up and I was taken to the Royal Derwent.
Heavily sedated and often locked in seclusion, the experience still haunts her.
I was sexually abused by a male. Sorry. One of the male attendants.
So this place where you were put to keep you safe?
No, you were never safe. You were actually safer outside the asylum than you were in. That was one of the ironies.
There was no mental illness diagnosis at the time she was admitted to the Royal Derwent.
In fact, even in the 1970s, there were still people being sent there who didn't have a diagnosis of mental illness. I know of one particular person who was there simply because she was underage and caught having sex. It was called moral mania. This is the initials of one of my abusers, which led to me ending up here at the Royal Derwent.
It wasn't until 2000 that Danny was diagnosed with multiple personality disorder. Additional personalities were created to help deal with the abuses. She's been campaigning for an apology to former patients of the Royal Derwent.
So it wasn't until I was discharged from the mental health service as a patient in 2006 that I was actually able to start talking about it.
She says many former patients are still in the system and too afraid to speak out for fear of retribution. For years, politicians have said they'd consider a formal apology.
There are the wrongs of the past that do need to be confronted.
After asking the question at a forum 2 years ago, Danny Lane had some hope. There was this response from the head of Tasmania's mental health services.
Accepting responsibility and apologising for transgressions is an important part of healing.
And a commitment from the then Minister for Human Services.
Certainly I am determined that the Parliament will apologise to the former residents of Willow Court, Royal Derwent.
But nothing's happened.
I don't think any government wants to accept the responsibility for such a catastrophic failure of looking after people in their care, in state care.
We were on the understanding that an apology was close, but other agendas got in the way, and of course another election came by, so now we're calling on the new state government to actually stand up and apologise.
Consumer group Flourish backs the push.
It is one of the top key consumer issues in the mental health space in Tasmania. It won't go away.
Miranda Ashby says it would show that the Hodgman government is committed to improved mental health services.
Particularly when they are also looking at the Rethink Mental Health project, which is a review of Tasmania's mental health system and looking forward. So what better way to start looking forward by actually closing the door on this particular part of our history.
Tasmania's Mental Health Council says an apology is well overdue. Could it be that because the Royal Derwent Hospital only closed relatively recently and people who were working in the system then are still employed, in fact, in that system now, and that they would feel that they were somehow being blamed if an apology were made?
If that's offered as an excuse, as a reason to not apologise to people with mental illness, then that's treating people with mental illness as second-class citizens compared to other people who are vulnerable and have suffered abuse. Now, if churches offered that as a reason for not giving an apology, it would not be accepted, and we don't think that that's an acceptable reason to not apologise in this case either.
The name of the state. They changed the name of the prison.
Danny Lane says there are numerous precedents. Victims of forced adoptions, the stolen generation and former wards of the state have all received formal apologies from State Parliament.
Former patients of the Royal Derwent are forgotten people from a forgotten institution, and I think the governments of the day, past and present, would like it to stay that way, forgotten. So to me, that smacks of selective discrimination based on disability. So I've actually approached the Office of the Anti-Discrimination Commission, and I'm lodging a claim of discrimination under the disability components of the Act.
Anyone in need of support should contact Lifeline on 131114.